and I spent the last year and a half, more or less, not quite, mostly here in Findhorn. And I'm doing fieldwork, and I'm currently kind of in the process of wrapping that fieldwork up. So I don't really, I feel about as lost as I sound. I feel like this, when I think about the material I have, it's like rich and verdant and beautiful and lush, like a jungle, but I'm standing right in the middle of it and there are no paths and I'm still sharpening my machete. Yeah? So you're listening to a work in progress. Still, the situation today is very different from when I wrote my abstract. Like when I wrote it, it was a year ago, I had been there for 4 months and I was completely overwhelmed with the experience of being here, and I really felt like I had nothing to say or couldn't speak outside of my own, impressions and very strong the extent of being here. And today I feel like I have my head above the surface a little bit more. So whereas I'm still going to focus my paper on the challenges and potential and kind of my experiences of doing this term of long-term fieldwork in a place like this, I've tried to structure my presentation a bit so that it also tells you a bit about Findhorn as a community. And I've focused my my presentation on my time in Findhorn, so this is mostly about Findhorn. And I'm also aware that a lot of the characteristics of what I'm going to talk about has to do with my personal story. It is quite a personal story, so I want to tell you a little bit of how I came to be here, because I feel like it's really relevant. So basically, after finishing my master's thesis in anthropology with some fieldwork in the Amazon with the tribal community there, I spent a few years traveling, and then I met or encountered my first eco-village, which was a place called Kuladamma in South Africa, where if any one of you went to the Gen Africa presentation yesterday, I was living together with Lucky and Lua, who were giving that presentation. And there, I very quickly found 2 things out about myself. One was that I looked at this eco-village and the Global Eco-Village Network that I also was introduced to, and I thought, wow, here is something really, really interesting to research. But I also thought, wow, here is somewhere really, really interesting to live. And in that instance, there was born a dual identity in me of researcher and community person. And this has been with me since then in everything I've done, and it's also really present in how I speak to you, from where I talk to you today. So after that experience in South Africa, I went back to Sweden, started my PhD in 2011, also moved into a small commune where I lived for the year I was there, and became the chair of Gen Sweden. So I was very involved in the movement there. I was also involved in the beginning of a Baltic project called Eco-Villages for Sustainable Rural Development, where I met Ina, for an example, so in the beginning of that. And there's a poster about that in the upper foyer, if you ever want to see. When I was there as an activist, not as a researcher, it was in my role as the chair of Gen. So what I wanted to research, when I found these eco-villages, was a process of localization and the potential of local communities to provide spaces with a lower and more local footprint, but also a space of autonomy where people had more control over their own lives, more control over their resources in terms of also identity, the story of who we are, what we are doing. And this is where I feel like I connect into, in a sense, the theme of utopia for this panel, because it is really about this, how can I create through community a space where I can live my dream or live according to my values in a different way. And what I wanted to live was a holistic life, more in line with my own values and my political, convictions. So, great. Eventually I came here. Here I am. And I'm standing here, with these 2 roles of researcher and community person in front of you. Some of you are fellow researchers I've met before. But Saskia I've been in meetings with. Thomas, we have whiskey sometimes at his house. I met Roger my first week here in the hot tub. I've lived with Vera, who sits over there, and I've been in the same work department as Karen, and I work in the same organization as Katharina. And I've been in meetings with John in lots of groups. So it's interesting for me to present this here in this community to you, because you're really forcing me to fuse these bits in a great way. And my engagement in this community, which has been instrumental, for the challenges and gifts that I'm going to talk about has to do with how I've approached it, and I have approached it from this dual identity. So I've been here mostly as a community member, I feel, or very, very involved. You know, I came like anybody who comes and wants to join the community. I've done all the programs of joining the community, which means that for 4 months I was like in full-time Findhorn Foundation programs, you know, sharing a room, pretty much sharing all my time or having all my time scheduled in different processes and in work and that. I've also, you know, chaired meetings. I've held workshops on topics. I take minutes for the NFA Council. I am part of you know, different groups and initiatives, and I do a lot of things. You know, I'm really here as an active agent. So I am about as far away from a like objective observer as you could possibly imagine. You know, really. And I think from Nicholas and Felix yesterday, I got the term participant immersion, and that feels kind of accurate. Although it's even more like I'm really like. I'm really, what can I say? I am actively influencing, you know, the thing I'm looking at. I'm really taking part of it. So what is this thing then that I am immersing myself in, and what has that to do? And here's where I think maybe I have something to say about the community, and maybe my fellow community members will agree with me. I don't know. The first thing, and for me, you know, this image that Marcus showed in the beginning of the island from Malinovsky's work, that is really the quintessential image of anthropological fieldwork, you know, and it's also very similar to fieldwork that I did before, which was in the Amazon. You know, it's like really far away, far removed from my own person, far removed from my own culture, and very sort of giving the illusion of separation and boundedness, with the very different, you know, cultural values. So I do speak from like that contrast as well as an anthropologist. So what makes this place special is in contrast to other field sites in classical anthropology and what I have experienced. And the first one is that this is a self-reflecting community. It's full of like processes and procedures where people individually and collectively like ask who they are, what they're about, and what they're doing in order to improve, you know, themselves and the community, which makes it really interesting to step into as a researcher, because there's all this research, you know, going on. The community is like actively researching itself as it goes along. But it takes place in very different ways. I mean, there are some quite academic studies, you know, engaging the intellect, but a lot of it takes place through like group process, like very highly emotionally charged things, through sharings, through playing the transformation game, you know, through doing maybe different rituals. One time I watched the Findhorn Foundation trustees present their analysis of the community by reenacting a family constellation sessions that they had. So it's like a really, really different way of accessing knowledge about what's happening, but it's really, you know, actively reflecting on things. The second thing that has really affected me is that community members or anybody that arrives here is really actively encouraged to develop deep, honest and transparent personal relationships, you know, with people. It's a part of it. And, you know, as an anthropologists talk about establishing rapport with people, and this is like a professional place for encouraging people to establish rapport on a very, very deep way. And this is done in, you know, different ways. There's a lot of self-disclosure and active listening in sharings, for an example. There is also procedures for conflict resolution, and where, you know, things like where an outside facilitator will come into a group or work with the whole group to encourage things to come to the surface and encourage people to work on their relationship in front of the group or in front of other people, or 2 by 2. So there's like a sense of very quickly deepening relationships and a lot of honesty and transparency in that, and also a lot of collaboration in how that's done. And that collaboration, which I will return to, is kind of embedded in Findhorn's ideology. You can see it in all the sort of founding principles and impulses. There's collaboration with spirit, there's collaboration with nature, and there's collaboration with the people around, which takes place in different ways. The third, that was really interesting coming in as an anthropologist, was that it's a place that has accessible and explicit ways of socializing guests to become community members. So instead of, you know, guessing and trying to see, okay, this is how I should be or how I shouldn't be, which I've done before and I think is quite normal, this is like being in a class almost, an experiential class of, you know, how to become a Findhornian, which is fantastic because it's a lot of material just given to the willing researcher, which is great. But that also takes place, through education sessions, but also through playing games or sharings. You learn to hold meditations, you learn practices of tuning in and attuning to decisions, like Felix and Nicholas was talking about yesterday. And the longer a person is here, including me, the more you're kind of expected to uphold those values and practices yourself, and in turn teach them to other people. So it's like it's a good way of really becoming what you're studying, which has challenges, but it's also really fascinating. And it's also a place where personal transformation through participation in all the other things I've mentioned is like actively encouraged and facilitated. So many people that arrive here, especially in the beginning of their stay, they have like huge experiences, like emotional breakthroughs or breakdowns, spiritual awakenings. Like they make life-changing decisions. They explore radically new and different sides of themselves. And this is partly, it's fantastically interesting to watch, and like a real privilege and gift. It also creates a very highly charged atmosphere to work in. There's a lot of vulnerability and a lot of emotion and stuff. And I also feel like, of course, participating in these things, like I'm not exempt from these experiences. I also had like amazing, life-changing, in some ways, experiences that were very deep and very emotional and very strong. And that has given me, going through that process with people, I kind of entered with a peer group, and that peer group is still here. So I've followed people, even though I have stepped out, I can still see. But to sort of take part in people's transformation really from the inside by participating gave me, a huge understanding of what it's like to join a community. But I also had periods when I felt completely overwhelmed, with the process, and it was very hard to be in a socialization process and like hold on to my identity as a researcher, to try to remain, at all with my nose above the surface of what was going on, and also, being in like emotional process oneself. How I had periods when like my field notes are only about me, It's really, I was really stuck in my own process, and I find it very, very hard to look outside. And this kind of created, a lot of identity crisis for me. And I think a lot of, what led me to, want to give this presentation to you is that, again, that identity crisis that's kind of exacerbated by being here in this process of in quite an intense way. So I'm still definitely working on integrating these things and like becoming a researcher. Like I say in my abstract, that I think I was hopeful when I wrote the abstract, thinking that by this time, I would have it sort of sorted out, would know what it was like, but I don't. Although working on it has been hugely helpful, and having all of you come here to the conference has been very, very important and helpful. So, a lot of the title of my presentation has to do with these aspects, nowhere to hide, all or nothing or nowhere to hide. It's like I had to really give myself completely to the process of being here. And, if you're 24/7 in contact with people in deep personal transformative relationships, and sharing spaces and even sharing a room, which I did for my first 4 months, I really had nowhere to hide. It was really this feeling of like, in a positive way, because it's also a very supportive environment. So, looking at these characteristics, there are a few gifts and challenges that I'd like to bring up in the time I have left. And the first one is, which is a gift, is the wealth of material offered by the community by itself, Like I said, it's researching itself constantly, and it like actively tries to socialize you. So it's very like thought out and sort of verbal and there. And it's great because it gives a lot of material. It's also, of course, a challenge to not just accept that material at face value. There are always other things. People say and do different things. And my analysis of an occasion or a process might be very, very different from that of the community. But there's still this sense of constant like self-generation of material, which, for example, when I lived in the Amazon, I lived with people who appreciated a very, very quiet life where nothing happened. It's a very different story. Very, very different. And I already talked about this feeling of like being way too enmeshed, of like being so emotionally involved and overwhelmed with these processes that I lost myself as a researcher. And I really thought it would be the end of me, as a researcher, but I think I'm coming through, so that's good. And from a I also found it very interesting to think about epistemology, like in relation to all those processes of finding knowledge in the community and finding knowledge through my own experience. That was quite intense, because Finnhorn's ontology is very different from, I would say, anthropology's ontology. Anthropologists generally don't have an explicit spiritual mission or believe in devas and nature beings. They might, but they don't say it. But I think, and it's valuable to access that. But it's also like to look at these ways of gaining knowledge that is through emotion, through embodiment, through motion, like movement, through different rituals. I feel I haven't really theorized it or come to a point of like how I want to use it, but I feel like it's a real window of opportunity for making my data and my research like richer. I know that I enjoy research that engages my senses, for example, when I read it. And I also really do believe that we can access knowledge in these different ways. But I don't really know how to approach it academically or from a theoretical point of view. I would love input on that. Another gift is all this built-in self-reflection that you get. Self-reflection is key to being a field worker, or an anthropological field worker at least. It's a huge part of the process. And here there's no way out of it, of course. There's no way to think that I'm not involved in this, and there's no way to not think about how I am and what I'm doing. And I also found it fascinating that here, in places where I've been before, that self-reflection has been private. It's been just me sitting, in my room and being like, what am I doing? or what's going on? And here it's public. It's public and relational. So I've done this self-reflection like with my friends, with my work department, with people that I've met in different ways. And it's created a real sense of collaborative learning that I like really appreciate and sort of politically believe in for anthropology. I think ethnographic fieldwork is always collaborative, The people you study always learn about themselves and about you, and you learn about them. But here it's like so explicit. And I like that. I find that in a lot of the things I've experienced, it's just making things that are there in anthropological research that I like explicit and like unavoidable to deal with. And I like that. So this sense of like mutuality and trust and collaborative learning. And on a more personal level, working here has been working in a place that's aligned with my personal values, and political mission. You could say that we have like a shared sense of utopia, if you want to attach that. And I've also worked with people that, in contrast to the picture of Malinovsky's island, people here have the same cultural background, share a language, we share an educational background, and we share this common vision. Like we're basically the same people. And surprisingly, well, I was surprised that I found this challenging. I really did. It's kind of like, I wrote about these people in the Amazon. They have no way to even start conceptualizing what academic research is, and no way of accessing my results except for what I tell them. Here I know that everything I write will be like read by people in the community, and I really enjoy this. It sounds trivial, but it's a bit rare in anthropology, at least has been. It's changing. But there's like a real double check. There's a real check on my honesty, my sensitivity, my way of treating materials, and my way of speaking about things. And I like that. And it also further strengthens this sense of collaboration, or mutuality. So I feel like my research process is much more of a dialogue than it has been in other places, which I appreciate. And there's also a sense that if I am them, there's no other and there's no, we. I'm the same, we're the same. I am researching myself. I am like on my own operating table, and I kind of like it. Tickles a little bit. And that's also where the title of this paper came from, because I have nowhere to hide. I can't pretend that I am not a part of what I'm doing. I can't hide behind a like fancy theory of what's going on, or behind dealing with those people over there, which anthropology has done a lot, and I still think there are tendencies in it, even again if it's changing. But it's again this like challenge of just pushing me a little bit further in tendencies that I think are already there. And I see that I'm almost out of time, so. The criticism I would have against myself is like really looking at when collaboration becomes collusion. How do I treat my own allegiances to this place? How do I deal with writing about sensitive material or things that collide with this vision or you know, anything that could be critical of this place. I don't feel very worried about it for different reasons that I can tell you if you ask me, because I need to hurry up. And I think one thing that is important that I want to finish with, also in the theme of utopia, is that, as I said, I came here like looking for my own utopia in a way. And I think that's really common for people that come here. You know, people are looking for a dream when they join a community. And for me, as for everybody else that I have seen arriving in this community, that dream has to die. And it's kind of painful. It's like a dream meeting reality, you know? And I really think, I mean, okay, special case because I really did share this dream, but I don't think that I had to be here for this time, for that dream to die, and for me to be able to see this place for what it is, instead of for what I want it to be, or what I'm frustrated that it's not, you know? Because that was really, really strong in me. And that's important for me as a researcher, but it was also like a really important process to understand. And also to understand, you know, what kind of questions or answers you will get if you ask different people about their experiences or their reasons for being here. You know, depending on where a person is in this stage of dream dying and disillusionment, you will get very, very different results. So I think it's a good awareness to have. So I feel like my research in really fun and interesting and challenging ways have been centered on, you know, a lot of collaboration, mutuality and dialogue with people. And kind of, I've just actively participated in ways that explicitly change and shape this system. And I've done that in line with my personal values, you know, that are very collaborative and that share this vision. And they are my personal values, but they're also key aspects of Findonian culture, you know, kind of like I said, all of this reflection and mutuality. So there is like a real, I guess there's a fit there, and it's also, you know, I have to disentangle these things. Even when I talk about it, you can see I'm fading. I don't know, I get confused. Anyways, so I've thought about, you know, should I be worried about this? Should I feel as like a bad researcher for being so enmeshed? You know? And my conclusion is that I've decided to see myself as a promise, and the thing I do as a promising thing, which I think is great. And in a way, you know, I see my research as my way and my contribution to make this world a better place, because I'm really researching something that I believe in. And I'm doing it in a community that sees itself as a center for, you know, researching and experimenting and demonstrating something that makes the world a better place. So in a way, I've come here and I have like given what I have to give and taken what I need to take to make that joint mission, you know, more possible. And I think that's really beautiful. And I don't think I would want to do, you know, anything else. And I have done that like through a process of collaboration, like deep relationships with people, and in an atmosphere of very high trust. And if I would start to go into, you know, the kind of gifts that Findon has to give or teach about sustainable culture or sustainable local culture, it would really be centered on those aspects of collaboration, relationship, and trust. So, you know, watch this space. In 3 years, I'll tell you all about that. Thank you.